Now, His Eminence, Judge Andrew Napolitano, is the host of Judging Freedom, a must-watch podcast, and he's a former New Jersey Superior Court judge. And I saw someone lamenting the other day and concurred. A great pity that, it was Roger Stone actually, a great pity that Trump had not appointed Judge Napolitano to the Supreme Court. But in that event, he wouldn't have been here on the mother of all talk shows. So it's an ill wind that bears nobody any good. Your Honor, Judge Napolitano, wonderful to see you again. I wonder if we could start with the turmoil on the economic, financial front. Is there method in this madness, or is it just madness?
I wish I could understand the method to the madness, George. And let me actually start by thanking you for inviting me to the show. We've been friends and collaborators for a long time. You were on my show recently. Yeah. The numbers went through the roof, the numbers of viewers, and I'm happy and thrilled to be on your show with you. I've been a fan for many years, as you know, before we actually met. I don't know if there's a method to his madness. In my view, and in the view of most legal scholars who've looked at this, what he did was absolutely unlawful and totally unconstitutional. The Constitution authorizes the Congress to raise taxes, not the president. A tariff is a sales tax. Okay, they gave him authority to impose this tariff in the case of an emergency, and then they defined emergency as a sudden and unexpected event which adversely affects national security or economic prosperity. The so-called emergency was the American, stated by Trump in his executive order, George, was the American imbalance of trade. That's been the case since 1934, so it's hardly a sudden and unexpected event. So there's no legal basis for what he's doing. Can the Congress impose tariffs? Well, yes, it could, but that would be after a great public debate in which the Congress made prudential judgments about how to manage the government's economic woes. When the president makes a wild decision like this on his own, and it causes the loss of 6 to 7 trillion in shareholder value, although, as you know, some of that is now coming back since he, in the past half hour, suspended the tariffs that he imposed last week on all countries except China. It makes one wonder if he understands economics 101. I say this as a friend of his, and if he knows what he's doing.
Yes, and this show was happy that he, rather than Kamala Harris, became the president. So we don't depart from a standpoint of wishing him failure. To the contrary. But he's doing his best, Your Honor, to disappoint, if not to shatter, the hopes that so many people had on this front and on the war front.
Yes, on the war front, about which you spoke right before the break, with respect to Israel, in my view, he is worse than Joe Biden. He has totally and completely unleashed Benjamin Netanyahu to resume the genocidal slaughter of the Palestinian people. Moreover, I'm of the view that the statement Trump issued, which was interpreted by the BBC and by The Economist magazine as a disappointment to Prime Minister Netanyahu, was a head fake intended to lull the American people and the Iranians into a false sense of security. Netanyahu's domestic problems are over the top and out of control and will consume him, and he knows it, unless he brings Israel to war. And he knows that he cannot bring Israel to war without the United States. Now, that raises a whole host of other problems that involve a couple of fellows named Putin and Xi. And it depends on how smart Donald Trump is as to whether or not he goes along with what Netanyahu desperately needs. But he cannot call himself a man of peace. He is still funding the war in Ukraine. It will stop in 2 weeks when he turns off the spigot that Joe Biden opened 3.5 years ago. And even worse, he's paying for 100% of the slaughter in Gaza. What kind of a man of peace is that?
Indeed, the whole shtick that he was hoping for a Nobel Peace Prize and so on, it all seems so long ago now, and he's only been in 3 months. It is quite an extraordinary turn of events, and not entirely explicable to me, because I got the feeling before that Trump didn't like Netanyahu very much. Trump's an alpha male, obviously, and he tends not to like the being in the presence of other alpha males. He tends to like people like little Macron that he can pat on the head and push around. And Netanyahu is, of course, not that kind of guy. So I got the feeling that Trump would not actually go the extra mile for Netanyahu. But in his ravings about Gaza, and they are ravings, I mean, the ravings in every sense. When he says Israel gave up the Gaza ocean front property, the Mediterranean being a sea, not an ocean, and Israel never had it to give it up. It is, as you well know, Your Honor, internationally, legally recognized as occupied territory, a status only recently reinforced by the last judgment of the ICJ, the highest court in the world. He seemed to think that he, under the authority of the United States, could simply have the Gaza Strip, when legally all he'd be doing was making America the illegal occupier rather than Israel.
His statement in the Oval Office in the presence of Prime Minister Netanyahu that Israel gave up the Gaza Strip probably galled Netanyahu as well, because it is so profoundly inaccurate. It's been Palestine for about 4,000 years. The Israelis have attempted to seize it, and it's been an open-air concentration camp there since 1948. Trump has designs on it to develop it. I mean, that to me is a gross and irresponsible statement to come out of the mouth of the President of the United States. If you want to give him credit, maybe he's playing games with Netanyahu. Maybe he's not. Maybe he likes him. Maybe he doesn't. But he's financing the slaughter of innocent people, and there's no justification for that, and there's no credit to be given for that. There's nothing but condemnation. George, I was surprised at the poll numbers that you read. Those polls are not publicized here in the West. Here in the United States, you can sense a feeling that enough is enough. But you have to get that feeling on shows like yours and mine. You won't get it where I worked for 24 years on Fox News. You won't get it from reading the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or the New York Times. You won't get it from CBS, ABC, NBC, or the BBC. You'll only get it from the alternative media. But I guess it's starting to resonate. Those numbers that you quoted a few moments ago, polls of Americans were extraordinary. 57% opposing this policy. The policy is ruinous for the United States. It has isolated not only Israel, but the United States as international pariahs.
Indeed so, and they are remarkable, given the blackout of truth on almost every medium, with the exception of yours, mine, the Grey Zone, and one or two others. You really have to search for the truth about the Israel-Palestine conflict in the US, and in Britain for that matter, though more in the US. And yet now, a clear majority of US adults say they disapprove of the current US relationship to Israel. That is something Trump should pay attention to. unless he's not able to, Your Honour. I postulated, you're his friend, I'm not, I postulated there's something dark about this. It can't just be about previous donations, because eaten bread is soon forgotten, as I'm sure Italian Americans also know, as well as Irish people. These donations are all in the past. They've all been spent. I'm wondering if he's compromised, if there's the Israeli equivalent of, you know, a P-gate tape on Trump that keeps him in the fold, as it were.
Well, the Mossad has a reputation for being extremely effective at controlling people. I would like to think that it is the money angle, not just with him, but with everybody around him, including about 95% of the United States Congress, which receives substantial donations from AIPAC. You know what AIPAC is, of course, as do your viewers and listeners. You did suggest in the segment before you brought me on that his involvement with the late monster Jeffrey Epstein might be held above his head in a way so as to control his behavior. I don't know. I hope that's not the case. That would be a severe and extreme form of blackmail, but you can't put anything past Mossad. Mossad is so devoted to the concept of the apartheid Jewish state that it'll do anything it can to keep the money flowing.
Let's turn, Your Honour, to the Chinese front, because that's what will be grabbing the headlines later tonight and tomorrow morning. Trump's latest, and as I say, it's only the latest because it's developing, as you say, by the half hour, is 154% tariffs on China. China's responded with 180% in retaliation. These numbers become a joke, don't they? Effectively, we're in a state of...
They've actually gone up. They've gone up since we began this broadcast.
Well, there you go. I mean, where is all this heading, Judge?
I wish I knew where it is heading. You talk about alpha males. You have two in Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping, neither of whom is prepared to back down. I am hoping that the three of them will be in Moscow on May 9th to celebrate that day in Russian history, and that the three of them will sit down with their aides and translators and work out some kind of a new reset, a new economic relationship. Maybe that's just wishful thinking, but you have to add to this the rantings and ravings of my former Fox colleague, who's now the Secretary of Defense, who last week in Japan faced China and threatened them and said, don't you dare think about doing anything with Taiwan because we'll be here to defend it. I mean, the military people will tell you, and I'm sure they have, that it is inconceivable that the United States could defend against the Chinese Navy and military if they want Taiwan, and no good purpose is served by threatening China. So you have the threat to China from Secretary Hegseth, and now you have these absurd and ridiculous tariffs. If you want to buy a toaster at Walmart or Amazon in the United States, last week it cost you $25. Now it costs you $100. Now, if you're interested in saving money on the toaster, you're not going to spend $100. And if you're looking for an American-made toaster, you're not going to find one at all. So who is Trump hurting? Trump's hurting what we call Joe Sixpack wearing a red MAGA cap, basically his blue-collar base. That's who he's hurting when he imposes these absurdly high triple-digit tariffs.
Indeed so, and that seems to me, I'm not an economist, but that seems to me the obvious point, that tariffs are going to be a blow to the standard of living of an American working class, which has already suffered so much ever since Clinton and the NAFTA, the deindustrialization. I mean, once upon a time, the best toasters would have been yours. Now,
yes,
none of the toasters are yours. We'd have been looking at, an Art Deco toaster of the typical American brand, but now that no longer exists. So you're going to have to go without the toaster. You're not going to pay $100 for a toaster that last week was 25. Right. And if you have to, you're going to blame President Trump for it. How are his ratings holding up in this maelstrom?
You know, they're about 45-45, so 45 approval, 45 disapproval, and some brain dead 10% of people have no opinion. The definitive polls come out over the weekend. I don't know what they will show. I don't know if they will show that Trump came to a sense of reason, or that the public thinks that he really didn't know what he was doing in the first place with this imposition of tariffs and then reduction of all of them except on China. The impression that most of us have is that he doesn't get basic economics 101. He hasn't been able to produce a single reputable economist, progressive, libertarian, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, academic, or industrial. No credible economist has supported what he's been doing. And even some of his strongest allies in the United States Senate have condemned it. It's too early to evaluate what he did this afternoon here in the U.S. afternoon by removing the tariffs on everyone except China. But those polls will be reflected when they're taken this weekend.
Now, finally, as an eminent jurist, you're familiar with the concept of habeas corpus. Can
Yes.
you produce the corpse, the body of Joe Biden? Is he still alive? Why haven't we heard anything from him? After all, just a few months ago, he was sharp as a tack behind closed doors and ready for another 4 years in the White House. Now, it's as if he was no longer alive. What can you tell us about him and the party that he led?
The books are starting to come out. The early drafts are starting to be leaked. That even his closest advisors were brokenhearted, to use the phrase of my friend George Stephanopoulos. George is at ABC News and a former advisor to President Clinton, but a very prominent journalist who knew Joe Biden for many years. Brokenhearted at the Joe Biden that they saw in the last year of his presidency. Did any of them ring a bell? No. Did any of them go to Kamala Harris and say, it's time to trigger the 27th Amendment, which would allow her to become acting president in the case of the president's disability? No, they all hid this stuff. They're all going to be embarrassed and humiliated for having done so. But in terms of where is he, I must tell you, in my view, and of course I'm not a physician, he's really incapable of making any intelligent comments today, because we have not heard one word from him since Donald Trump became president, even though Trump has undone much of what Joe Biden did.
So where does that leave the Democrats? With Kamala Harris? Or are they going to skip a generation and go to a younger Kamala Harris by the name of AOC?
I think the latter is more likely than the former. I don't know if it will be AOC. It might be, even though his track record is terrible, he's very articulate and attractive. It might be the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. It might be somebody that we can't put our finger on them now. Or Donald Trump might just hand this to the Democrats if he keeps plucking people off the streets. This is where I thought you were going when you mentioned habeas corpus, and locking them up without due process. and if he keeps wrecking the economy. He may give the Democrats a dream that they never imagined they would have, which is a really competitive race in their primaries that would produce a really strong candidate.